today we're going to talk about water rights and what are water rights, and a little bit about the history of Rhode Island and how the landscape has changed throughout time. So why don't you tell us about what are water rights?
This is a law that's been around for a long, long time. It's been since we were English colonies. All the lands at one point belonged to the king and to for the benefit of the people, benefit of the public. And eventually, when we won the revolution and set up our state governments and federal governments, these rights through what's called the public trust doctrine became rights of our own governments, and that trickled down to us as property owners. Early on in early statehood, or the states and the government and the courts were pretty flexible and lenient to the property owner. And the reason why was basically because they didn't have any money set aside to develop and improve the lands. So the landscape here in Rhode Island, even Providence, if you drive through Providence today, it's completely different than what it was, for obvious reasons. I mean, we didn't have cars on highways. We had horses on dirt roads. But a lot of these roads were all that we see today were all underwater at one point. These lands were below what's called the mean high water mark. So what people would do is, if they were waterfront, they'd just fill in the lands below these high water marks and fill the land up to the point where it was no longer below the water, and then they would use that land for their own. They'd develop it, they'd fix it. Build things on it, sell it, and that's how our coastline evolved and improved. Now it's totally different, as you can imagine, because we've got the DEM, we've got the CRMC, we have all these regulatory authorities that say, hey, we got to preserve what we have today for future generations, and this is how we do it. We limit your ability to improve without concern about how it impacts the wetland areas, for pollution or for other reasons. Maybe wildlife could get affected by the development. So they evaluate all these things when you pull a permit.
So it is possible, if you wanted to try to be able to fill in some wetlands to either build a property on, or say you're a builder and you want to fill in wetlands to build a subdivision, that is actually something you can do today.
Potentially. It's really regulated a lot at this point, and it would really have to show, does the public have a benefit as a result of this development that's being done. They can't just go ahead and just pull a permit and get the rubber stamped permission to go ahead and do whatever they want. It's got to serve like a public purpose. That's a hurdle that has to be crossed and potentially might be difficult to cross. So it wouldn't be like from the 1600s when you could fill in those lands and not be impacted by any government or court concern. They back then you'd be allowed to do that. Now you'd have to show why, and potentially maybe even have to allocate certain portions of those waterfront properties to a beach or some kind of public purpose that people could access. You don't want to develop it at the exclusion of the public.